So first off, we wanted to say, well, I'll introduce myself. I'm Sydney Packa, the development manager at Season of Justice. So we just wanted to say thank you so much for joining us this evening. We're thrilled to be able to present insight into impact today as part of Jog for Justice 2025. All of you have made Jog for Justice 2025 so successful already, but we are always looking for a little bit more support. We have 190 signups. So we'd love if you can share with your community and help us get 10 more before next Wednesday. We have raised over $8,000 as well for more than 80 supporters. So if you can help us hit that $10,000 mark by Wednesday as well, we'd appreciate it. We also want to take a moment to thank our wonderful sponsors, including our supporter sponsor, Voices for Justice Media, and a special shout out to our presenting sponsor, AudioChuck, for making the event possible. So we really appreciate all of that support. Just a couple housekeeping things. We definitely welcome questions. If any questions come up throughout the conversation between Kendall and Pam, please put them in the Q&A and we'll do our best to have a few minutes to answer them at the end. If not, we will definitely pass them along to Pam and provide answers at a later date. So with all of the housekeeping out of the way, I am truly honored to introduce you to our panelists. Joining us tonight is Kendall Mills, Season of Justice's program manager, and our certified victim advocate, along with the lovely Pamela Francis, who is sister of Carmen Van Huss and also a passionate DNA advocate. So I will pass it along to you two, and thank you again for joining us this evening.
Awesome. Thank you, Sydney. First, I just, again, want to echo what Sydney said. We are absolutely honored to be able to sit down with you, Pam, and talk about, your experience and Carmen's story. But first, before we jump right into that, I do want to just give everybody kind of a little bit of behind the scenes about how our grant process works, why Season of Justice exists, why what we do is so important and needed. And how it's helped cases, just like Carmen's, get that much closer to a resolution. So, our DNA grant program was built with a clear goal in mind. We wanted to eliminate the barriers that prevent law enforcement from accessing advanced DNA testing and forensic services. And, for many law enforcement agencies, the biggest hurdle for, accessing all of that is funding, lack of technology, especially like smaller rural departments. The smaller the department, the smaller the evidence testing budget is. And so that's where we come in. Our grants are designed to fund testing that's centered around unknown suspect DNA, whether that involves retesting evidence that has previously been tested with less sensitive technology, or applying newer technologies like forensic genetic genealogy on existing unknown suspect profiles where that wasn't available when the case was first investigated. But one of the biggest things that sets our grant program apart from others is how we fund this testing. Instead of being like a traditional grant program where funding is dispersed to an organization or a person, we pay directly. And the reason that we do that is because when when agencies go through receiving grants, fundings, oftentimes it gets tied up. It gets tied up in budget approvals, city council meetings, layers of internal paperwork, recording. And so to eliminate all of that, because our goal is to get them this access, get the evidence to the labs, get this tested, speed up the process, et cetera. So our process eliminates all of that completely. We call it our direct to vendor approach. And that way investigators don't have to wait. They don't have to wait for the internal financial approvals. They don't have to worry about whether or not funding will expire, figure out where to shift their department's budgets, how to, what happens if, resources are shifted to somewhere else that, wasn't necessarily, where they intended initially for the grant funding to go. Really simply put, we pay the bills and they get the results that they need to continue their investigation. And again, like I said, at the end of the day, it's just getting through, cutting the time it takes, to get evidence tested, getting access to that technology, because especially in cold cases, just by the nature of being a cold case, it's a complex investigation. That evidence degrades over time. The longer it's exposed to the elements, the longer it's exposed, it's being stored, more sensitive technology is going to be necessary. And there are a couple of reasons why it's not accessible to law enforcement right now. Again, the majority of it is funding and technology that's available at the public labs. I think a lot of us forget that our publicly funded crime labs are just that. They are taxpayer funded, just like our law enforcement. And that comes with very small budgets, limited access to resources. And forensic technology is not cheap. So, we joke that there's $1 million machine out there for DNA sequencing. And imagine a county lab being able to afford that. Not only is the technology expensive, you have to hire the staff, the specialists to be able to operate that technology. You also have to have the time to go through a process called validation. Anytime a new technique, new technology is brought into a lab, especially an accredited forensics lab, it has to go through validation. And this process, depending on what they're validating, can extend beyond 1-2 years. That takes people away from actively, sequencing DNA and conducting their analysis in the lab. And it's an expensive process when you think about all of the things, that come into play. That's why private labs exist. And that's where we're able, to fund and help bridge that funding gap and make sure that investigators get what they need. And so, so those private labs, they come with a pretty hefty price tag. It's not cheap. It's not cheap to fund and do this testing and fund this work. When an agency is ready to apply, let's just jump right into the application process. It's very simple, and it's designed intentionally to be simple. When an agency is ready to apply, they visit our website. The application is, again, designed to be very straightforward and streamlined. It requests key information about the case, the type of testing that they're requesting funding for, the private vendor lab that they intend to use, and then how they believe the results could impact the investigation. The application process, is, again, it's designed to be quick, simple. We want to make this as easy as possible for investigators to submit these applications, and not have to deal with any additional administrative logistics that just, again, take them off of working a case. So once submitted, our team reviews that application internally. We check for eligibility. We just make sure that the case fits our eligibility criteria. It's an unsolved homicide or violent crime, suspicious missing persons. And then we assess the investigative value and feasibility of that testing plan that's being requested. After that, initial review, we have a wonderful case review team. It's just a small committee of experts within our organization. And they help us, prioritize cases based on, strength of the case, likelihood of testing success, and the potential for advancing the investigation. We receive a lot more applications than our resources allow us to fund every grant cycle. And so this review process is important because it helps us make the most strategic decision to impact these cases with the resources that we've got. From there, our strongest applications are presented to our board of directors for their final approval. They award grants quarterly, and that makes sure we're allocating our resources where we can make the biggest difference. And then the process gets started. Once a grant gets approved, we work directly with the agency and the forensic lab to facilitate and fund the testing, get the process moving forward. And we stay in close, regular contact with the agency and the grantee throughout the process. We track milestones like when evidence is submitted, when testing begins, when testing has completed, what the results are, and what the next steps are. All that to say, even though our process is designed to speed forensic testing up, give access to this advanced forensic technology for these complex cold cases, and provide the financial resources that law enforcement needs to get this done. Even with all of that considered, it can still take a lot of time for results to get back. For the many cases that we fund, we've awarded, I think, 168 individual DNA testing grants. The average is about 1.5 to 2 years before we start seeing results. Some cases, of course, will move a lot faster than others, depending on what evidence we're working with. But the complex ones, the ones using forensic genetic genealogy, those can take even longer. So it's an extremely slow process, but that brings us to where we are today. It brings us to Carmen's story, the dedication and persistence that it took to get where we are right now. And just for everybody, just again, to kind of put this all into context, Carmen's case was the second grant that Season of Justice ever funded back in 2020. And the arrest was made last year. So again, you see that kind of timeline, but we are honored to be able to have this conversation, to talk with Pam so that you can share more about Carmen, what you've been through, what your family has been through, and what this case and its recent developments mean to you. So I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so honored. I didn't realize until just this year how big of an impact Season of Justice made on this case, and I'm just beyond grateful. So I'm excited to share the story and hopefully help for the cause. So I thought I could start just by telling everybody a little bit about Carmen. She had the modern family before it was kind of cool to have a modern family. She was born as she was my cousin by blood. And when she was about 3, her father, who's my uncle, my mom's brother, called my parents and asked if they would raise Carmen. They would take her into our home and raise her. Her dad and her biological mother were not together, but they separately had decided that they were not in a place to raise Carmen in the way that they wanted to. So my parents agreed and we took Carmen in. We moved back from Illinois to take her in, and we lived in Indiana with her, which is where her parents were, and we raised her as part of our family. So I just wanted to kind of go through this because Carmen has a lot of people that love her, and I want to at least acknowledge all of them. Of course, I'm going to tell you about my experience and my family and who Carmen was to me, but Carmen also has a brother that she's very close to. Her dad ended up getting remarried, and he had a son, Jimmy. So if anybody's ever seen any of the bits on TV, news press conferences and things like that, it's usually Jimmy that speaks. He's about 5 years younger than Carmen, and they had a really close relationship. And then later in Carmen's life, she reunited with her birth mother, and she had another daughter. And so Carmen had the privilege of getting to know her as a sister as well. So there's lots of us out here that consider Carmen our sister, our brother, our family members. So anyway, I just wanted to share that with everybody. But I most definitely considered Carmen my sister, and she came to live with us when she was 3. And I'm just going to share my screen really quickly so I can give everybody a sense of who Carmen was to me. This is what Carmen looked like when she came to my home. She was 3 years old and I was 4.5. And to be honest, I just don't really remember my life before her. Like she's always been part of my family. My parents had 7 children of their own. And so I just wanted to show this picture is really terrible quality. It's really old, but it kind of gives you a sense. In the back, you see 5 older girls, and my parents had 5 girls right in a row. They were all within like a year apart from each other. And then there was a 6-year gap, and they had me, and I'm sitting kind of in the middle in this white dress. And then my brother is over here on the chair with my dad, and then this is Carmen. And so it almost felt in a way like we grew up with 2 families. Like we had the older girls, and then they called us the little guys, the 3 little guys. And so we kind of had our own little family pact in a way. And these are just some of the photos of us. we didn't grow up with a lot of money. We had to make our own fun. It was a lot of, tree climbing and playing on the swing set and just being goofy together. But we just had the most idyllic childhood. I wouldn't replace it for anything. We used to take walks on the railroad tracks with my dad. We had walking sticks, as you can see. And, Carmen brought to our family just a real life, like a spunk. She had this really outgoing and living on the edge kind of personality. She was always pushing the boundaries. She was the one who would like want to sneak out or, do the thing that made me feel like we were going to get in trouble. I remember once she climbed a neighbor's fence and rode their horses without them even being home. And I just was like, oh, we're going to get in so much trouble. But she thought I was a big goody two shoe. So she, she like pushed me aside. This is Carmen when she got a little bit older. I've always just loved this photo. It was at Christmas. Our family gets together every year and does a Christmas sing along, and we sing Christmas carols together. And she was there for that. This is me and her. She had the most beautiful smile. One of her eyes was green and one was blue, which I always thought was really cool. And this is my favorite photo of her. I believe it was her sophomore year of high school. So let's call her like 15 or 16 there. She was also a really good artist, and she was going to school when she passed away. She was a student at the Heron School of Art in Indianapolis, which now is part of Indiana University. These are some of her very early drawings when she was still like in middle school, but it just kind of gives you a sense of her style. She really liked watercolors, and she could just sit with a tablet and draw like it was nothing. I mean, I couldn't do this to save my life, but she was just really talented. So anyway, that's all the pictures I have, but
I love that you have her watercoloring and
I
her
know.
drawings. That's so cool.
Great.
That's so cool to be able to have that piece of her.
It's just she just had such a life. I don't know how to describe it, but everything about her, she lit up a room. So
you can tell that your favorite picture, her sophomore year of high
Yeah.
school, that's the picture that we're familiar with too.
Yeah.
And it's just, you can see like her face, her smile. It's genuine. It's huge. It just lights up. Lights up this room, and it's a photo.
Exactly.
So that's really, thank you so much for sharing
As an
those.
adult now, I kind of look back with a different perspective, but she had 3 families to navigate. I mean, that's a little bit hard.
Yeah.
And her father's family, I'd say that's where she got her living on the edge kind of like personality. He certainly lived more on the edge than my parents did. And so also just navigating between those types of scenarios and personalities, it's, that's a lot on a young person. And I didn't appreciate that at the time. She had a lot going on, and she still managed to just always be smiling. So I miss her. But
thank you so much for sharing all
she
of
was
that.
living in an apartment with her boyfriend when she was killed. And actually things were going really well for her. She was an art student at Heron, which I mentioned. She had a new boyfriend of like 3 months. They were super in love. She was really happy. So it was, just such unfortunate circumstance. But anyway, what happened is that it was March of 1993. It was a Monday night, and my family was all at the hospital because my grandmother was really sick. She was in the hospital. I wasn't living in state. I was living in Washington, D.C., so I wasn't here. But Carmen was there with both my mom and my family, and then her dad and his son and his wife and everything. So there was a lot of people there. But they were visiting my grandmother, and when they left, it was actually, looking back, it's like one of these things that's meant to be. She pulled my mom aside and she told my mom how much she meant to her and how grateful she was that my mom was, able to raise her in the way that she did. And just some of those kinds of things that your kids almost never tell you, again, looking at it as an adult, I mean, those are the moments that warm my heart the most with my daughter. And just for my mom to have gotten that is just really special. Anyway, Carmen left and she went back to her apartment to wash her uniform for work the next day. And it was late. I'm going to put it at like 10 o'clock. Around 11:30, the neighbors heard her laughing with a man a male voice in her apartment. But then a couple of hours later, it turned to screams. And Carmen was saying, "Get off me, get off me." And then it became quiet and they heard hurried footsteps down the hallway. So the really terrible part of the story is that Carmen had just moved in, and the people that lived in that apartment before her were very noisy and they fought a lot. So the neighbors didn't call the police or didn't call for help, but they did report it to the apartment manager, and the next day they put a note on her door to keep the noise down, which but nobody checked on her. Nobody checked on her. And so after she didn't show up for work for 2 days in a row, they called her emergency contact. And her father was the first one to show up at the scene. Her door was shut but unlocked, so he was able to get in. And it was just a studio. It was very small. But he saw her right there, right there on the floor. She had been stabbed 67 times, half of which were in her skull, in her face, and she was sexually assaulted and mutilated. So it was a horrific scene. The walls were covered in blood. It was obvious that she had put up a really big fight. Anyway, so her dad found her. He called my father. He came. Together they talked to the authorities. They went and told other people and so on. So terrible night. I was living in Washington, D.C. It's funny, what you remember about these things, but she died on a Monday night into the Tuesday morning, and then she was found on a Wednesday. You probably, Kendall, you're too young to remember this, but I was watching 90210 in Melrose Place every Wednesday night, and on that particular night, both of those episodes had somebody die.
Wow.
And it was after those episodes that my brother called me and told me that she had been killed. So it's just, I don't know why I always remember that, but anyway, I came home the next day. And, more shocking, when we were at her wake, my grandmother passed away. So it was crazy, crazy time. But anyway, so that's what happened. Of course, we didn't know some of those details at first, but we found them out later. Yeah, and it's, I'll get into this later, but part of the negative part about having something go cold, a case goes cold, and then your mind plays tricks with you, and you come up with all these things that you think might have happened or who did it, and
Right.
for me, it immediately turned into a fear. Like, I was really afraid of who's behind me. Do I need to be worried? Like, who did this and why? Do I know the person? Was it random? Like, I wasn't sure which would be worse, if I knew the person or it was a random person. And I was only 21 and she was 19. So I was pretty young too. But for me, it just manifested into a lot of fear right away. So that was new for me. I hadn't grown up having any fear like that. And the cops were assuring us that they were talking to friends and family and acquaintances and people that lived in the building and all the things, and that they were working all the leads, but there was never anything promising. There was never any lead that went anywhere. And the people that we had, suspected in our minds or made up that could have done this, or those people all checked out and didn't go anywhere. So it just left us feeling very vulnerable. And after a while, the calls got fewer and fewer. And I mean, to be honest with you, it felt like nobody cared. And I'm sure a lot of families feel that way. And it's probably easy to feel that way when there aren't any answers and you're suffering, like, why isn't someone calling me with an update? Why isn't someone checking in? And I guess that's too much to expect, really. But after years of no calls, or you call the cops and they say, well, it's still on my desk, it just felt like no one cares,
Do you remember how, kind of how long it took for the case to kind of just go cold? Or like, were y'all really in constant communication with law enforcement during the beginning of the investigation? Or was it pretty
for
much
like 2 months?
2 months?
For a
Wow.
couple of months, they would call, ask questions. who's who in the family. I mean, it was a little confusing. So a lot of family tree navigating, who were her friends, who'd she hang out with, that type of thing. But it just didn't last very long. And,
Mhm.
I hesitate to point blame or point fingers or any of those
Sure.
things that you might tend to want to do. But
Sure.
it felt like they just were very understaffed or they just didn't care. Like it just didn't seem to get much attention, you know.
Yeah. And I
So
think that's for y'all, that's your entire world, right?
exactly.
And unfortunately, we live in a world where for law enforcement, that's a Wednesday.
I know.
And that's a hard reality pill to have to swallow. And at the same time, y'all still, families deserve that communication and
Yeah.
transparency in the investigation as well. So I'm really sorry that y'all
And I
experienced
see
that.
it every day. I saw it today. There was someone killed and it'll disappear. And I feel like we've all become so
Yeah.
desensitized to it too.
Yeah,
It's just not
absolutely.
big news anymore or whatever. Um, but yeah, so that was hard. And it went 20 years before I got a call out of the blue from a detective. I was at the nail salon and I picked up the phone, which I never do. And he says, "My name's Bill Carter, and I'd like to work Carmen's case in my spare time." And I was like, "Oh my God, I just won the
Amazing.
lottery. This is amazing." But it turns out one of his coworkers at the department knew Carmen from high school. And Bill, the detective who called me, had just had success solving another cold case. And so this individual asked Bill, "Would you mind taking a look at Carmen's case?" Now, Bill wasn't a homicide detective nor a cold case detective, so it wasn't really in his sort of lane, but he
Mhm.
was willing to take a look at it and he wanted to interview me. And he ended up working it in his spare time. So he took the case in 2013 and he's the one who took it, who's taken it to the arrest we had last fall. So
Mhm.
I'm just beyond grateful for him and all of his dedication. He did not give up, and I'm not at liberty to talk about a lot of the details because it's still
Sure.
active, but I can tell you that he took that on like it was his own daughter, and I'm just so grateful for that. So grateful. And he also had an analyst join him at a certain point, and she was really great at the DNA at the building the family tree and doing all of those
Mhm.
things. So the two of them
Mhm.
really, really worked well together, and I'm super grateful for their help, obviously.
Would you say that he was the one, just his willingness to and desire to get involved and take this case and take a look at it? Was that the point where you felt the case, there was a jump start in the case or a renewed just
Definitely a
in
jump start, and that was. I mean, it's so many points in the process. I felt so hopeful, and then so many points in the process you get let down. But I had such renewed hope every time Bill would call. I'm like, "Yes, Bill called. What's going on?" And he had a lot of great leads over the years, a lot of things that seemed promising, but then they would fall through or it would check out on DNA or whatever. It's the up and the down and the up and the down, and your emotions are just, you know, getting pulled through the ringer, you know?
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think, something that I've been contemplating on recently is in a cold case. I mean, it's been 32 years now, but at that point it was 20, 25 years. You just can't, there's no closure. You know,
Yeah.
it's like it's like a purgatory of grief. Like, and I've lost other people in my life that I've been close to, so I'm familiar with that type of grief too. But it's different when you understand why and you can wrap your head around what happened. And y- you know, it's such an unsettling feeling of not being able to put this to rest. And what's happened is Carmen's memory to me and to so many others have become her murder.
Yeah.
I mean, I got a hold of her diary and I read it in hopes that I could reconnect with her because I kind of forget. I forget those moments that I cherish, because now it's all about who's, who are we looking at and what came back from the DNA and did you talk to so-and-so and interview so-and-so, and when's the trial? And it's exhausting. So the grief, it just doesn't end. I'm really hoping that we get to a point where we have that closure, but yeah, so it jump started the case. I was super hopeful. I mean, obviously he's given us the gift of justice. Um, but along the way, it's the up and downs, and that's hard. That's hard. And the other thing that I'll share as an insight into this challenge, or the challenges that go along with this type of scenario. When Bill called me, it was 2013. I had just moved back to Indiana, so that was convenient because I could be local and talk to him. But my daughter was 7 years old. So I was a single mom, and I have one daughter. We're very close, but she was 7. And so she was at an age where she understood. She's very smart. She's picking up on things. She's understanding what happened to Carmen, at least at the high level, and that it's a cold case, that there's no answers. And that's a hard thing to explain to a child. Why did they do this terrible thing and there's no consequence? Should we be afraid? Who did this? Why did they do that? And then she had fear. So I actually went to a therapist and asked them for advice specifically for this. And I thought I'd share what they told me just in case anybody else is going through this, which was, there's a difference between fear, instilling fear, and being educated. And that the best thing that I could do for my daughter was to teach her how to not put herself in vulnerable positions. Not to say Carmen did or didn't, it doesn't matter. It just to make her feel safe, that if she took steps to not put herself in vulnerable positions, that would give her a sense of security. So we've talked a lot about that over the years. My daughter's now 19, so it's a long time ago. But I think it was a really helpful tool in terms of navigating those conversations with her. And then, the reality that no, we didn't have an answer, and we're going to, Bill's helping us find one. And so that was good too. But I thought that was really helpful.
Absolutely. Knowledge is power. And if you are empowered to be able to at least protect yourself, I think that makes perfect sense.
Right.
Thank you.
So don't not go out at night, but just make sure you're with someone.
Exactly.
Or,
exactly.
those kinds of things. Yeah. Don't not go to the party, but don't leave by yourself with someone you don't know,
Exactly.
Those kinds of things. So that was helpful for us.
So
one of the hardest things I think about the case was the DNA.
Yeah, exactly what I was going to ask.
Yeah. I mean, both technically, but also emotionally. So again, I can't share everything that we went through, but I can say that there were so many roadblocks. And in the beginning, the technology just wasn't there. And so there was a lot of discussion around, well, we don't have that much DNA. So if we risk it and use it now, like what if better technology comes later and then we don't have enough? Or maybe we wish we had more. So we were like hoarding the DNA and not wanting to like test it too quickly. But then when the technology was there, it became primarily, in my mind at least, a funding issue. So we knew it was very expensive. My dad tried to pay for it, but they told us, we can't take your money. I still don't understand that. Like, we have the money.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
You probably know a lot more about that than I do, but it just didn't seem to make a lot of sense. And then we thought, well, we could fundraise for the money, but no, we couldn't do that either. And it seemed like there was so much red tape and roadblock being put up in front of us that it was very frustrating, because I knew the DNA could give us answers that we were basically being told we can't get it,
Well, you just explained exactly why the Season of Justice was founded. We were founded by Ashley, host of Crime Junkie, and it was indirect as an answer to her not being able to pay for forensic testing, and the exact, well, I'll cover it, I'll pay for it.
I know.
And yeah, when you're dealing with government entities, publicly funded entities, there is a lot that they'd want to prevent conflict of interest or the perception of conflict of interest. And it seems like it should be so simple. And and I'm glad that we have created an inroad to at least tackle that as much as we can. But over 300,000 unsolved cases in this country, there's a lot. I hope that, in the future that there are other avenues for people like us to make an impact in these cases. Cause yeah, that's a huge barrier.
Yeah. Well, I want to address a couple of things you said. First of all, though, I just want to backtrack and say I learned just in January that Ashley and Season of Justice was who paid for that testing. And I still haven't actually talked to Ashley directly, but what I've been told is that it was in part because of Carmen's case. And that she had tried to pay for that testing and was told no, and that the solution of a nonprofit was palatable. So she created a nonprofit. And I still feel so like stunted or frozen, or I don't know what the right word is, but I'm still in shock that even happened. I mean, earlier I told you I just never felt like anybody cared about Carmen's case. So for it to impact her, for it to impact someone so much that they create a nonprofit and then to create the path to help so many other families. I mean, it's just so moving to me.
Yeah.
I've been really reflecting these last few months of now I feel like I'm being pulled to do more. And so what does my part look like? Because we've received so much from you guys and you're doing so much. And so, the other thing that you just said is 300,000 plus cold cases in this country. I feel like it's an awareness thing and it's a fundraising thing. And not to be like on a sales pitch at all, but it's so important. And, I give money to charities, people give money. And sometimes you'll hear, well, if you give money to this charity, it's not really going to be impacting because it'll go mostly to overhead or whatever. This actually makes a big difference in a lot of people's lives, and it's the other thing I didn't mention earlier is with cold cases and not being able to have closure. I was saying how it's like this grief that never ends. There's also a statistically higher percent chance of mental illness and physical illness in people that are left behind. And so you give me 32 years to develop mental or physical illness, your money isn't just paying for the DNA to catch someone, but it's also helping all the living survivors to live their best life. It's also possibly exonerating someone who didn't do the crime and also helping the people that are still in that person's life in case they're violent to them. It's just the impact goes beyond just that one person. So you take 300,000 cold cases and you multiply it by at least a factor of 10, if not more. It's just it's such an impactful cause. So yeah, so I've been reflecting on that. I've shared with you there's things I want to do to help raise funds for that. I mean, and I think part of it's awareness. Yeah, I didn't even know about Season of Justice, but oh my gosh, I'm so glad you guys exist.
Like I say, we're very small behind the scenes. We play a small part and we hope for a big impact. But
I know, but yeah, I mean, I was literally talking to Jimmy, Carmen's other brother, saying we should have a nonprofit. We should start a nonprofit. And then I learned about you guys. I'm like, well, there's no use in duplicating effort. I mean, let's just help them, So
that's amazing.
Yeah. And so to move on with that then, so you guys paid for the DNA, and I don't remember if it was 20 or 21 it was paid for. Might have been
It would have been 20 or very early in 21.
Okay. Well, the first thing that we did, and I think if I can remember correctly, it was the summer of 21, we got a photo of the person. So Parabon was able to show us what the person most likely looked like, which was super encouraging. I'm like, oh my God, first of all, this is just cool, but the sort of letdown piece was it could look like a lot of people. And that's what he looked like at the time. And that's been 20, 30 years ago. So, it didn't tell us who it was, that was 21. I didn't hear that we had a hit from genealogy until January of 24. So that was, I mean, again, the years that slipped by and just you know, is hard. So we had the hit on genealogy, and then I'm like, great, it's great news, but you know, there's a process. And so
Mhm.
it's like, oh my God, again. So anyway, that's where his analyst was really helpful because she built this family tree. She did all of her research on
Mhm.
whose relation. And it ended up that it was the something like the great niece once removed did
Wow.
the 23andMe test, and that was a high match. So they could tell it would be your great uncle once removed or whatever that was.
Mhm.
And it turns out, without getting into too many details, that this person lived in Carmen's apartment. So, you know, and then this takes me down the whole road of fate. Like she had just moved in. So what's, you know, it's like such a case of wrong place, wrong time. I mean,
Mm.
I don't know the circumstances around that night. I have no idea, but it just seems like wrong place, wrong time.
It could have been anybody,
Could have
you
been
know,
anybody.
could have been
Exactly.
any woman
So
there.
that's where I start to think, wow, you know, this person's been on the street for 32 years. Like, what else has been going on? I don't know. And I
Mhm.
don't want to speculate, but it just makes me worry for other people. So they got the hit, and then yeah, he was arrested in August of 24. So
Mhm.
that was roughly 6 months ago, you know, 8 months ago.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
he wasn't brought to Indiana. He was in Missouri, so he wasn't brought here until November, which also seemed like eons. And then we're awaiting a trial. And
Yeah.
the way that they're a couple years behind on murder cases, and the way that it works is they schedule a date, but they know they're going to push it. Like the prosecutor told us, I would be shocked if we go to trial before 2026. So we're settling in for kind of a long wait here, you know. So it's a long process, but yeah.
Do
And
you remember
go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just gonna ask, like, do you remember, like, how you felt when you got the news of an arrest, you know, back in August?
I do. It was a little bit the way I felt when I found out Season of Justice paid for the DNA. Like it just kind of froze me. Like it, you think it's going to be the answer to all your prayers, and you're so you can't wait for the day that there's an arrest, and you think it's going to everything's going to be great. You're going to have closure, and it just doesn't feel that way at all. There's a bit of excitement, you know, and just adrenaline rush that goes along with that. What were the details? What happened? Did he say anything? All those things. But at the end of the day, you still have this huge weight in front of you and you still have no answers, you know, and now there's this question mark, like, you know, and I also hoped he would confess. That's always what I thought is the person's now 32 years older and he's going to have a conscience and he's going to say, you know, oh, I did it for this reason. I'm so sorry, whatever. But that didn't happen either, you know. Uh,
Um,
so yeah, it's I know it's really hard to explain, but it stunned me. It really did.
mm,
I was traveling that day, and it was a big day for me professionally. I was able to interview someone who's been like an icon in my life, and I was so excited to go do this interview. And it was when I was leaving my hotel to go to the interview that I got the news. So I showed up completely stunned, and I had to share this with him, and he was very gracious about it, but I had to tell him where my head was because I just didn't feel myself. I was kind of like in a fog, you know. Ended up the interview went fine and it all worked out, but it was a very surreal day for me. So,
wow.
and you know, now again, as an adult, and I've got a 19-year-old child who is pretty much exactly the same age Carmen was when she died. And this person's been arrested, and I'm getting the details of where he lived, and we're going through maybe what we think happened and all that. It just, it kind of drives home for me how young Carmen was. I was only a couple years older than her, so at the time, it didn't strike me as acutely as it does now. But when I look at my own daughter who's 19, she's just getting started. I mean, yes, she's had a great life so far and she's strong and she's smart and all the things and she has her talents. But at the same time, she has 90% of her life left to live and the slate is still pretty much clean. She gets to do whatever she wants, you know, and it just strikes me as how young Carmen was. And then I go to why. Why was that necessary? You know, why take that life? And so I don't know. I don't know if the trial will give us answers or not. I was told by the prosecutor that in most murder cases, there is no defense. Like in my mind, I thought he'd show up and say, I didn't do it, or I actually was somewhere else, or try to say he had an alibi, which he might. But she said that in most cases, they don't do that. They come and they basically tell the prosecutor, you prove it. You prove that I did this. And they don't say anything. And so then it's on the prosecution to prove it. So I don't know if we'll get answers, you know, and I'm afraid that's what I want or I'll need to have that closure. And I don't know. It's just always like this thing living in the back of my head that just doesn't go away.
Yeah. Human nature to have to understand why, like,
Yeah, exactly.
and if you don't get the answer, it's just natural inclination to try to figure it out yourself, which,
Exactly.
like you said earlier, that's hard.
It is. And, you know, so we talked a little bit about the importance of this work and fundraising for it. The other thing I think a lot about in terms of advocacy, well, I'll say first, I have reached out to our state representatives. There's a couple of representatives that I know, and I really want to see families have more rights for DNA. If a case sits for a certain amount of time, I feel like the family should be able to go to a season of justice or a parabon and have that DNA taken from the police department and tested and perhaps investigated privately. Like, I
Mhm.
get that there's a chain of command and, you know, that can't interfere with police work, but after a certain amount of years, it's clearly not moving. But, you know, there's in
Right.
Indianapolis alone, we have 1,000 cold cases on the shelf with DNA in them. What are we doing? I
Wow.
mean,
Yeah.
you know, and again, I'm not in the department, so I can't speak to that, but it's either a funding issue or it's a staffing issue. It's something. But
Mhm.
those families don't have any rights to ask for that DNA to take it and test it separately, which I would really like to see change.
Yeah. There's, chain of custody and everything all considered, there's a way to collaborate.
Mhm.
Collaboration is every case we work on or fund
Yeah.
is us collaborating, and a lot of times it's not just us. There are other people, other organizations involved, you know in on the investigative side. But yeah, there's got to be room for some kind of collaboration that could
Yeah.
just open it up for families to be more empowered and
I
have
agree.
more agency to do what they can. you
Exactly.
know
I mean, we have the
yeah.
technology now, and, you know, the funding is where you guys come in, and that's kind of the big thing. But if we can get the funding or if the family's willing to pay for that, then it should be something that we should be able to collaborate and work out, you know,
Yeah.
move
Yeah.
some of these along and get more justice. So,
Yeah. What you talked a little bit about, you talked with Carmen's brother about, we should start a nonprofit, etc. What do you hope happens? What do you hope come out of this, when in the future, what for other families that are going through this exact thing right now, or will?
I feel you know, I'm the kind of person who likes to take action. Like that's how
Mhm.
I work through things is like, I have a problem, I'm going to solve it. So for me, I'm very action oriented. I want to be an advocate for raising money for DNA testing. I also want to advocate for family rights. So those are two
Yeah.
things that I think are important. So to the extent that this community, I mean, I want to say thank you to anybody on the phone who's given money to this. You're making such a difference. And so to spread that word, right? Um, the other thing that I'm thinking a lot about lately, and I would implore others to think about too, is just being there for each other in a mental health way. Like reading more about, you know, homicides and knowing that majority of homicides are people we know or, you know, that occur from people that you know. And then a majority of those homicides are domestic violence. you know, I just think we are so focused on our phones and our internet and our careers and all these things, and we don't connect as often as we used to. And obviously, we all know mental health is a big issue these days, but really try to create safe space, especially for young people, so that they have someone to go to and talk to and be an advocate for them. Or if you see something, if you see someone being mistreated, you know, step in and help. I think that's really important, and also building that community. Like I obviously am kind of new to this space, but I don't see a big community around this topic, you know, victims of murder and families and even violent crime. Like I would like to see more support for each other and collaboration, and to know that you're not in it alone. And maybe what I'm working on with my legislators can help another person in another state, and we can start to collaborate and, you know, fight for justice a little bit more as a unit rather than just individually. Um, so I don't know yet. I want to see things progress. I want to help you guys.
Yeah. Well, I think all of that is spot on.
I'll tell you what, if the tables were turned, Carmen would be fighting for my justice. So you know, I have a voice, I have some connections, I've got the power to make a change, and that's now what I want to do. Is I just want to help. I want to help you guys as much as I can, because you are really facilitating a key part of the process. I mean, the linchpin of our case was DNA. I mean, 30 years we had no answers until we got the DNA. That's the linchpin. We had to have it. And it was such a difficult thing to get. And so that's, you know, I think that's where I can help the most right now, is just trying to raise awareness and contribute financially, getting other
That's
people.
beautiful.
Yeah.
I want to, you know, I could talk for hours. But I do want to, you know, just close with, what's your best memory? What's your favorite memory of Carmen? Aside from her sneaking across the fence to go ride horses, because that's pretty iconic. So
I mean, it was just the simplicity, you know, that childlike life that she brought to every situation. We would sing songs together from the radio, and then we'd record ourselves and listen to them back, and, you know, do it again to see if we could do it better. I mean, just the stupid stuff we do. We played in for anybody who knows the Baumeister case, we used to play in his backyard before we knew any better. So we lived right there. We just, you know, playing in the creeks, and, you know, my first kiss with a boy was under her dare. It just, all the things that she had, you know, me get into with her, that I always felt like I was going to get in trouble.
I love that. I love that she picked on you for being a goody two shoes.
Oh my gosh, she teased me. I was a musician. I was in a school play. I sang a song once, and I have a recording. My dad recorded me singing this song, and from the background you can hear Carmen go, meh, meh. You know,
oh my gosh, that's such a little sister thing to do.
I know.
I love that. Oh, she sounds like, yeah, she sounds just like a joy. I'm glad that you got the time that you did with her.
I am too, honestly. I am too. It was a blessing. So thank you so much for letting me talk to you guys.
Absolutely. Thank you for being willing to share your story. I know that every single time you talk about it, you're rehashing this wound, and, you know, that doesn't help with, you know, kind of getting through it. And but we want to learn more, you know, like you said earlier, Carmen she was a person. She's more than what happened to her. And so to have the opportunity to share that, and to see, you know, those pictures, to see, you know, her artwork, like that means so much to us. So
absolutely. Well, thank you.
Well, thank you guys. We have about 5 minutes for questions, if there are any. I did see one in the chat that had been answered, just about, you know, how much testing costs. The average, oh, we got one right here. Is there an average cost for DNA testing? The average quote that we receive for a case is around $12,000 to $14,000 for a single case. I have seen quotes come in from upwards of $20,000, $40,000. It truly depends on how much evidence needs to be tested, and what kind of testing, how complex that testing is. But you're looking at, you know, especially when it comes to cold cases and advanced DNA testing, you're looking at, you know, $10,000 plus for a single case. And for a lot of, especially rural departments, smaller departments, that's an entire budget for a year, you know, like I've seen quotes come in that are the entire evidence budget for a department for every single case, for every crime, not just this one, and for crimes that haven't happened yet, you know. So it's expensive. It's extremely expensive. And so it's an honor to be able to support these investigations in that way, but we know that, you know, it couldn't be done without everybody on this call, without everybody who participates in Jog for Justice, and, you know, and who supports us throughout the year. So again, I will just close. Pam, thank you so much for sharing your story. I hope this is the first of many conversations. And for everyone, you know, joining us today, your support means the world. We could not do this without you. So
Thank you.
thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.